A good Erev Shabbos. Once upon a time, it was Tu Bishvat in Samarkand. The year was 1943, and tens of thousands of Jewish refugees had fled to the far interior of the Soviet Union, to places like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. It was far from the deportations and the ghettos and the trains and the camps, but it wasn't an easy life in any times, let alone in wartime. But in Samarkand there was a Jew, Raphael, the rabbi of the community, who emulated the hospitality that Avraham Avinu was famous for. Rav Raphael's house had a courtyard, and somehow the communists had not expropriated the house or the land from him. So Jews who were uprooted and exiled and found themselves here in the Soviet Asia regions, foreign to them, found a refuge and a sanctuary and help and support here. Rav Raphael was one of those charismatic people whose smile lit up the place wherever he was, and even more so on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Those who tell the story say that the greatest joy, the brightest light in his year, was to observe Tu Bishvat. Why? Winter leaves early in Samarkand, and the trees bloom quickly. Rav Raphael had some trees growing in the courtyard of his house, especially a few fruit trees. And that year especially, they even began to show some first signs of blossoming by Tu Bishvat. There's a mitzvah to make a special bracha when you see trees first blooming in early spring. It goes, "Blessed are you, God, sovereign of the universe, whose world lacks nothing, and who created beautiful creatures and trees for the benefit and delight of human beings." It's a beautiful bracha, which has always been in the siddur of the Bukharan Jews. And Reb Raphael was even able to make the bracha by Tu Bishvat that year, so he was particularly overjoyed. In his little courtyard orchard, Rav Raphael had an apricot tree. Apricot trees also grow in Israel, which was not the case with the other trees he had growing there. So the apricot tree was his particular special reminder of Eretz Yisrael. Of course, when he would see this tree blooming, it brought even a higher degree of joy. To see the actual land of Israel was his dream of a lifetime. And each year, a little bit of that dream would blossom before his eyes. So, in 1943, swept up in the emotions of his favorite holiday, Reb Raphael invited as many refugees as he could fit into his courtyard, and he said to them, Look at these trees beginning to blossom. A few weeks ago, they were barren and bare in the depths of winter. So I tell you that our winter will end also. And he took out 2 bags of raisins and almonds, which were certainly a rare treat, and with his eyes brimming with love and affection, he gave a handful of raisins and almonds to each person, a miracle. Those who were sad and broken and exiled and crushed felt revived when they held these treats in their hand and smelled the smells, and it gave them hope for the future. Together, they made the bracha Borei Peri Ha'etz, God creates the fruit of the tree, and they enjoyed this little taste of better days ahead. Then Reb Raphael went and got his special treat. He kept some dried apricots from the previous year, and he always made the Shehecheyanu bracha over an apricot from his own tree. So he called out the Shehecheyanu with a loud, clear voice that touched the whole gathering, and he chewed his apricot with his eyes closed and his thoughts on Israel. They danced, they sang, they said Shehecheyanu, and while their bodies were in Samarkand, their hearts and their souls were in Yerushalayim. Now, I'm very drawn to these stories of the Shoah era, partly because when I was a kid, people were just starting to talk about the Holocaust in the public square. Books and movies were coming out. It had been a few decades since the event, and the silence of survivors and witnesses was giving way to testimony. From what I remember then, the stories of suffering and martyrdom were told, the horrors, much more than the stories of perseverance and faith and humanity and Judaism on the part of the Jews. Maybe I'm trying to make up for what seemed missing. So here's another non-Holocaust story about the fruits of the tree. Every week on Erev Shabbos, Rabbi Yaakov of Melitz, who was one of the sons of Reb Naftali of Rapshitz, would cut an apple in half and think about it, meditate over it. When you cut an apple in half from between the top and bottom, so the equator of the apple, you can see 10 points. And he would remind himself of the 10 sayings with which God created the world. And he would think about the story in Bereshis where Yaakov comes into his father Yitzchak to get the blessings. And Yitzchak smells him and says, "The smell of my son is the scent of a field that God has blessed." The Zohar comments that that smell was the smell of the Chakal Tapuchin, the heavenly apple orchard discussed in the mystical texts that are mentioned in Askinu Sodasa, in every Shabbat meal, in the Sephardic Siddur. Then Reb Yaakov would distribute pieces of the apple to everyone at the table at his Friday night dinner. I once went to the Bostoner Rebbe for Friday night dinner. I always wondered why it was that he would cut up apples and he would ask you your name and give you a piece of apple. So now I figured out, I connected the dots. So Tu Bishvat is the 15th of Shvat, of course. Tu is Tes Vav, the Hebrew letters that have the numerical value of 15 when you add them up. This Shabbos is Yud Shvat, the 10th. So Wednesday night and Thursday is the 15th, Tet Vav, or Tu Bishvat, of the month of Shvat. It's called the Jewish Arbor Day, the New Year for trees. It's not just some random day that was picked to celebrate trees. It's actually a machloikas in the Mishnah. It's a dispute in Halacha. The Mishnah in Tractate Rosh Hashanah teaches us that there's not one, but actually 4 Rosh Hashanah. There's 4 New Years, actually. One for kings, one for years, one for tithes, and one for trees. Just like you start counting the years on the 1st of Tishrei. This year, the 1st of Tishrei, it became 5,781, starting from Rosh Hashanah, right? The 1st of Tishrei last September, and that's going to turn this coming Tishrei, which, by the way, is the evening of Labor Day Monday. It will become 5,782. That's the day when we start the new counting of the years. So similarly, there's also a date when we count the years of the reign of kings. There's a fiscal year, as it were, for tithing animals. Any animals born after that date are tithed together, an annual tithe. And the students of Hillel and Shammai argue about when that fiscal date for trees should be. Should it be the 1st of Shvat, says Beis Shammai? Should it be the 15th of Shvat, says Beis Hillel? And the dispute is whether a tree that blooms or begins to give fruit after this date is its produce tithed with the next year's crop, while the one that blooms or fruits appear before this date is tithed with the previous year's crop. And the reason they say, the logic behind it, is that either it's nourished, this tree was nourished with the rains that fall from before Tishrei, from before Rosh Hashanah, and if the blossoms appear later, it's because of the rains from this year, after Tishrei. Nice. You'll say, "Thanks, Rabbi. It's very nice to know. I'm not a tree. I don't own an orchard. And if what you tell us is accurate, the agricultural laws only apply in Israel. So who really cares? What's the difference in my life?" I'll say you're right, but listen to this. It is a holiday. It's on the calendar. And if you want to keep the Jewish holidays, this one is in there too, in the mix. And I will submit to you, you never heard of a Jewish holiday that was easier to observe than Tu Bishvat. Let me quote to you in its entirety the full observance of Tu Bishvat according to the brief code of Jewish law, Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. You ready? Here we go. Chapter 139, subsection 26, quote, "On the 15th of Shvat, it's the new year for trees, so we omit Tachanun. It is customary to eat different kinds of fruit from the trees." End. That's it. That's the entire laws of Tu Bishvat in our times. The part I didn't tell you, it doesn't even get its own chapter. It's just tacked on to the end of the laws of Hanukkah because it follows soon after, and that's all there is to it. It doesn't, not really long enough to get its own section. So you hear, just omit Tachanun. Tachanun is the extra penitential prayers we say weekdays after the Amidah. These prayers include putting down our heads. They're omitted on happy occasions. Shabbat, we don't say Tachanun. Yom Tov, anytime there's a bris in shul, if there's a wedding that day, if there's a bride and groom during their Sheva brachas, the 7 days of rejoicing after they get married, or even the afternoon before a holiday, a Friday afternoon, for example, before Shabbos, that's even sufficient to supersede Tachanun. So, the full legal observance of this holiday is simply leave out Tachanun from your daily prayers. I believe this is the unsung hero of the Jewish calendar. It's the one Jewish holiday everybody keeps. Every Jew you ever heard of, or you never heard of, omits Tachanun on Tu Bishvat. Okay, most omit it because they're omitting the entire prayer service for the day. And just to be careful, so they don't accidentally say Tachanun on Tu Bishvat, they don't daven the whole year. Okay, I'm teasing a little bit here. But think about it. This holiday is the one holiday that enjoys full observance by the entire nation of Israel. What about that part about eating tree fruits? Well, we discussed in one of our classes this week the difference between law and custom, and why it's important to understand the distinction. The law, the basic mitzvah, the commandment, the obligation, if you will, the connection, we call it a requirement, is one part. That's what we're obligated to do or to not do. In this case, to leave out a certain part of the prayer service during the day. The custom side of things, the minhag, or the culture part of it, how else can we call it? The tradition is if you want to enhance your observance, deepen your connection, make it a little bit more meaningful and tangible, so you have this option also. And that's what happened with Tu Bishvat. Want to observe the New Year for trees? Don't say Tachanun. Done. You're done. That's all it is. That's all there is to it. Want to enhance it a little bit, make it a little bit more special? Okay, so eat some fruit that grows on a tree. Maybe a bite of boxer, some carob if your teeth can stand it, an apple, maybe some nuts. The bracha on tree fruits is logically Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed are you God, sovereign of the universe, Borei peri ha'etz. You created the fruit of the tree. There, you enhanced it. Very nice. Now, an even further enhancement, to take it a step further, is the recent custom, or innovation if you will, of a Tu Bishvat Seder. This is not mandated in the Torah or Talmud anywhere. It was rather made up as a new idea by the mystics of Tveria and Tzfat in the 1600s, and it's gained some currency, and it started to stick in our era. If you'd like to find out more, we're going to make a Tu Bishvat Seder on Zoom this Wednesday night at 8 p.m. The link is in your email, and you're more than welcome, warmly invited to join us. If you'd like to have some fruits to eat at the Seder, the suggested grocery list is in the same email. This is not a Seder where it's going to keep you up all night or requires you to clean your entire house first. If you have a drink and a bowl of mixed nuts, you're already ready for the Tu Bishvat Seder. There's a number of things that you could eat at the Tu Bishvat Seder. Certainly not all of them are even necessary or required. Even if you have something that gets the bracha Borei peri ha'etz, any tree, fruit or nut, you're good. Here's one more story about joy and delight in enhancing the observance of Tu Bishvat. The Baal Shem Tov and his circle were celebrating this holiday, Tu Bishvat, one year, in Ukraine. And that year, it was typically cold and snowy. But the Baal Shem Tov took his disciples on a sleigh ride in the snow. And as they went along, they sang parts from Perek Shira, a sefer that describes how every creature, even plants, sing Torah verses praising their Creator. The fig tree says, "The one who tends the fig tree shall eat its fruit," a quote from Proverbs. The pomegranate tree says, "Your cheeks are like the halves of a pomegranate," it's a quote from Song of Songs. The palm tree says what? Obviously, "Tzadik katara yifrach," the righteous shall flourish like a palm tree, from chapter 92 of Psalms that we say every Shabbos. So the students were so joyful they felt lifted on clouds of light. And as they were traveling along through the woods, they saw the sun peek through the trees of the forest, and they sang yet another verse. "Then shall the trees of the forest sing for joy before God. Az yirananu kol atzei ya'ar." Psalm 96. They sang louder and they sang stronger until they noticed birds flying above them, chirping so loudly at them they felt that the birds were singing along with them too. So the accusation is that the Jews focus sometimes too much on the small details of observance and we miss the bigger picture, the wonders of the world around us, beauty, the aesthetic sense, the wonders of creation. I think Tu Bishvat is a particularly strong piece of evidence that this is not so. And we do in fact have many vantage points to appreciate and to celebrate the world around us. The stories here of celebration during times of tribulation or flying along through the Polish woods with Hasidic Rebbes might not be part of our lifetime experiences, but they show that in those circumstances, which were never as luxurious and tranquil as our times, Jews found ways to appreciate and to rejoice. So how much more so we can take that opportunity and even make that opportunity. So whether you're able to join us on Wednesday evening or not, please don't say Tachanun. Do not say Tachanun on Thursday. And if you can make a Borei peri ha'etz over an apple, a pear, a pistachio, a clementine, or an apricot, or even better, over a date, or a fig, or a grape, or a pomegranate, or another fruit of the land of Israel, take a moment and savor it, and think of better times to come. Good Shabbos.